In the quiet corners of the soul, Carl Jung found the richest truths. His work was not only an exploration of the unconscious mind, but also a gentle invitation to embrace the depths of silence, where the outer noise fades and the inner voice begins to speak. Jung once said, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." Silence to Jung was not emptiness, but a sacred space, alive with symbols, shadows, and the subtle stirrings of the psyche. In silence, we meet the self, not the mask we show the world, but the eternal presence beneath. This meeting can be soft and illuminating or unsettling and raw, but always revealing. He believed that our greatest transformations begin not in noise or action, but in stillness. Silence, like a mirror, reflects our truest essence and gently uncovers the patterns we've buried deep. In a world driven by speed and distraction, Jung reminds us that wholeness doesn't come from doing more, but from listening more, especially to what is unspoken. He taught that silence is the womb of insight, the threshold where the ego dissolves, and archetypes emerge to guide us. Through silence, the fragmented parts of our being can begin to integrate. It is where the soul stretches out and says, "Here I am." In embracing silence, we do not lose ourselves. We discover who we've been all along. Dear everyone, before we continue the program, if you enjoy this topic, please comment number 1. If you'd like me to create more similar content, comment number 2. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any useful videos. Thank you, and wish you all meaningful moments. Have you ever felt the weight of the world go quiet? In a moment so still, it almost scared you? Have you ever sat alone in a room with no phone, no music, no distractions, just the soft hum of your own presence, and suddenly realized you didn't really know yourself? In our hyper-connected world, silence has become rare, even feared. But Carl Jung believed it is in silence that we begin to truly hear. Not the noise of the world, but the voice of the soul. He didn't just study the mind, he listened to it. And what he found in that stillness was vast, mythic, cosmic. He wrote, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." This is a journey through that looking glass, through silence, into the depths of the self, through the timeless teachings of Carl Jung. Welcome to Galactic Wisdom. Let us begin. 1. The silence that shaped a soul, Carl Jung's early encounters with the inner world. Carl Jung was never quite like the other children. Born in 1875 in a quiet Swiss village, he often preferred the company of his thoughts over the laughter of other kids. While others played, Jung wandered through meadows, forests, and long silent corridors of his own mind. There, in the stillness, something ancient stirred. He was drawn to solitude, not out of shyness, but out of reverence. Even as a child, he sensed that there was something sacred hidden beneath the noise of the everyday, something unspoken, something vast. His father was a Protestant pastor, a man of dogma, rituals, and order, but Jung saw through the cracks in doctrine. He questioned, not rebelliously, but curiously. He could feel that truth wasn't only in the scripture, it was in the silence between the words. One day at age 12, Jung fainted at school. He began to suffer what we might now call dissociative episodes. But rather than fight it, he listened. He saw these episodes not as illness, but as gateways. He began keeping a secret inner life, full of visions, voices, and strange dreams. In the silence of his room, he would watch his imagination unfold like myth. Giants, wise old men, towers, darkness, light, archetypes, though he didn't yet have that word. What most would have ignored, Jung approached with awe. "I learned that what is most personal is also most universal," he would later write. This was his first glimpse of what he would call the collective unconscious, a vast inner landscape shared by all humans, accessible not through logic but through silence and surrender. Silence for Jung wasn't absence, it was a threshold, a doorway, the veil between the seen and the unseen, where the psyche begins to speak in symbols, not sentences. Even as a teenager, he instinctively retreated into quiet when the world grew loud. While others sought answers in textbooks or teachers, Jung sat beside rivers, beneath trees, and in candlelit corners, waiting. And the answers came, not in words, but in images, dreams, patterns, feelings that transcended language. Jung's journals from this time are filled with sketches, dream recollections, and cryptic symbols. What others might dismiss as fantasy, he saw as messages from the deeper self. from a place beyond time. As he entered adulthood and began formal training in psychiatry, his colleagues leaned toward rationality, biology, and data. But Jung held on to what he had always known, that the psyche was not a machine to be repaired, but a mystery to be honored. He would go on to say that modern people are afraid of silence because it brings us close to the unconscious. But he wasn't afraid. He was fascinated. He believed that what we call madness may sometimes be the soul's desperate attempt to speak, to be heard through the clutter of our conscious lives. His childhood taught him this, that silence does not empty us. It introduces us to what we've been carrying all along. Imagine a young boy, misunderstood, unsure of the world, sitting in silence and finding something larger than himself, a sense of being watched by something timeless, something benevolent, something inner. And yet, he also encountered darkness in that stillness. Jung never romanticized the inner world. He knew that silence can reveal not only peace, but pain, trauma, repression, shadow. But this too he welcomed. To Jung, the shadow wasn't evil. It was simply the part of us we refused to see. And silence was the way to meet it with compassion. The outer world, loud and fast, distracts us from the inner reckoning we all must face. But in silence there is no escape, only truth. The boy who walked alone through the woods, who listened more than he spoke, who dreamed in myth and woke in meaning. That boy would become a man whose life work was built on a single conviction, that the soul speaks in silence, and that by learning to listen, we might finally begin to heal. So what if the silence you fear is the very place your truth is waiting? 2. The voice in the void. How silence connects us to the unconscious mind. Silence is not just the absence of sound. It is a doorway. When we become quiet, truly quiet, not only do we step away from the world, we begin to step into ourselves, into the realm Carl Jung called the unconscious. This realm is not empty, though it feels vast. It is full, overflowing with dreams, instincts, fears, forgotten memories, and ancestral truths. Jung believed that every human being carries this inner world, whether or not they know it. But to hear its voice, we must first become silent. He once said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. And what is the first step in making the unconscious conscious? Listening. Not with our ears, but with our awareness. Jung taught that the unconscious doesn't speak in words. It speaks in symbols, in dreams, in patterns, in the gut feelings we ignore, the fantasies we suppress, and the stories we keep repeating in our lives. But the problem is, we've been trained to override this deeper language. We drown it out with stimulation, analysis, noise, and in doing so, we lose the relationship with the self. Silence for Jung was the forgotten bridge, the sacred medium through which this relationship could be restored. When we sit in silence, the conscious mind begins to loosen its grip. Thoughts slow down. The ego, the identity we've carefully constructed, begins to soften. And then if we're willing, a voice begins to rise. A different kind of voice, not loud, not forceful, but ancient, knowing. Have you ever had a dream so vivid that it stayed with you for days? Or felt a sudden insight in a quiet moment, something that felt like it came from beyond you and yet was deeply familiar? This is the voice of the unconscious, and it reveals itself most often when we are not trying to do, but to be. Jung wrote extensively about the necessity of creating inner space. Not just physical silence, but emotional stillness, an attitude of openness. He would often sit alone at his stone tower in Bollingen on the shores of Lake Zurich, where he had no electricity, no running water. There, in simplicity and silence, he reconnected with what he called the self, the totality of the psyche, beyond ego. This wasn't escapism. This was returning to the source of all his visions, insights, and healing. He called it active imagination, the practice of entering dialogue with the unconscious through images, symbols, and presence. But the first requirement for this dialogue was silence. It's important to understand that Jung did not romanticize the unconscious. He knew it held beauty, but also danger. There were shadows there, repression, archetypal energies so powerful they could overwhelm a person. But ignoring the unconscious only gave it more power. Facing it, in silence, allowed transformation. He compared this process to alchemy. The silence was the crucible, the unconscious, the raw material, and the self, the gold. Most people try to reason their way to understanding, But Jung suggested we must instead feel, dream, and intuit our way into wholeness. And that begins by creating a space where the unconscious can emerge, unfiltered, uncensored, unjudged. This is why Jungians often speak of holding the tension of opposites, because silence invites contradiction, light and dark, hope and fear. It is not meant to resolve everything, but to contain it, to allow the unconscious to speak so that we might finally listen. So what happens when we actually allow silence in? For many, the first feeling is discomfort. The mind races, old memories surface, emotions we thought we had buried come flooding in. But this is not failure. This is the beginning of hearing what the unconscious has been saying all along. Jung encouraged us to record our dreams, reflect on our fantasies, notice synchronicities, not to analyze them like puzzles, but to relate to them as messages from the deeper self. And he often reminded us, the unconscious is not trying to hurt us, it is trying to heal us. It's just been waiting for us to slow down long enough to hear it. So what if right now you paused, turned off the noise, and simply sat with yourself? What might rise up from your depths? What image? What memory? What feeling long denied? Could it be that what you've been searching for has been whispering all along? Silence is not empty. It is the voice of the soul, and the unconscious is not a dark abyss to be feared, but a sacred sea, rich with forgotten wisdom, waiting patiently for your return. 3. Archetypes awakened, meeting the inner beings in stillness. When you close your eyes and let the world fall silent, who or what do you meet? It may surprise you to discover that within that stillness there are others waiting, not people in the traditional sense, but timeless patterns, forces, and intelligences, what Carl Jung called archetypes. Archetypes are not characters we invent. They are universal blueprints: the mother, the hero, the shadow, the wise old man, the child, the trickster. They live inside all of us, across all cultures, across all time. They are the great inner beings who shape how we feel, how we love, how we dream. And the gateway to meeting them? Silence. Jung discovered that when the outer world becomes quiet, the inner landscape begins to move. And soon, images start to rise. You're no longer alone. You're surrounded by myth, by figures that carry a message far older than your own story. These are not hallucinations. They are psychic truths, as real, Jung believed, as gravity or light, just dwelling in a different realm. He once wrote, "Archetypes are like riverbeds which dry up when the water deserts them, but which it can find again at any time. Silence is the rain. Stillness is what brings the water back." Most of us live entirely on the surface. We believe our identity is a name, a job, a collection of memories. But Jung invites us to go deeper, to find that beneath the surface is a drama of the soul. And each archetype is a player waiting for its cue. In silence, we meet the wise old man, that inner sage, offering insight not from intellect, but from knowing. We meet the great mother, nurturing, but also fierce and wild. We meet the shadow, the parts of ourselves we've cast aside and yet hold tremendous power. These figures come to us in dreams, yes, but also in meditation, in sudden images during moments of stillness, in fantasies that visit us when we are quiet and alone. The key is not to judge or interpret too quickly. Jung warned us, the ego loves to jump in and make sense of what it sees. But the archetypal realm does not care for logic. It moves in image and symbol, and its truths are not literal. They are felt. Imagine you sit in silence. At first, only thoughts, then boredom, then quiet. And then an image, a storm, a doorway. You didn't think this image, it arrived. This is the language of the archetype. Jung spent much of his life drawing and painting the beings he encountered in silence. His Red Book is filled with wild, mystical illustrations, figures who appeared to him in dreams and visions. Rather than deny them, he honored them. He asked them questions. He wrote down their answers. He believed the psyche was alive, and that through silence we could develop a dialogue with these deeper parts of ourselves. But why does this matter? Why should we care about archetypes at all? Because they are the hidden architects of our lives. The mother archetype shapes how we nurture or fear intimacy. The hero shapes how we face challenges or avoid them. The shadow shapes the behaviors we can't explain. And the more we try to ignore these forces, the more they control us from the dark. But in silence, in patient, mindful stillness, we invite them into the light. And once we see them, we are no longer ruled by them. Jung did not believe we had to go to a temple or retreat to a mountaintop. The sacred space is already within us, and silence is the door. The archetypes are not enemies or illusions. They are allies. They are the ancient companions of the human soul, and once awakened, they bring us into greater wholeness, into greater understanding, not just of ourselves, but of humanity as a whole. So the next time you feel something stirring in the quiet, some presence behind your thoughts, pause. Ask yourself, who has come to visit me now? And listen, not with your ears, but with your heart, because in that silence, the ancient ones speak. 4. The shadow and stillness. How silence reveals what we hide. Have you ever sat in silence and felt unsettled? Not because something outside disturbed you, but because something inside began to rise? Carl Jung called this the moment when we come face to face with the shadow, the hidden parts of ourselves that we've denied, repressed, or forgotten. The shadow is not evil. It's not the villain within. It is simply the truth we have pushed out of view, the pain we didn't process, the desire we feared, the anger we weren't allowed to feel, the power we were taught to mistrust. In our busy lives, we rarely notice it. We stay distracted. We stay positive. But when the world goes quiet, when we are alone with no one to impress or perform for, the shadow emerges. And silence, Jung taught, is the space where the shadow begins to speak. He once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." This was not a metaphor for him. It was a spiritual imperative. To grow, to heal, to truly know ourselves, we must be willing to sit in the silence long enough to meet the parts of us we've locked away. But why would we do this? Why sit in stillness and invite discomfort? Because Jung believed the shadow is not here to hurt us, it's here to complete us. He explained that each of us carries a psychic opposite. The confident person carries insecurity. The gentle person holds buried rage. The righteous person hides forbidden desires. Whatever we most strongly deny lives in our shadow, and in silence we begin to feel it. Not all at once, but in flashes, in dreams, in uncomfortable emotions that surface seemingly from nowhere. In thoughts we don't want to admit we're having. But rather than push these moments away, Jung taught us to turn toward them, gently, curiously, with compassion. Because behind every shadow is a piece of ourselves asking to be seen, not punished. The shadow may appear in silence as shame, as fear, as the urge to get up and distract yourself, as a flood of emotion you don't understand. But this is the healing process. Jung said the shadow is 90% gold. Not because it feels good, but because within it lies our lost energy. When we repress a truth, we fragment. When we accept it, we integrate. Silence is not about emptying the mind of all darkness. It's about making space for truth. And the truth is, you are not just your light. You are your contradictions, your wounds, your rejected feelings, your forgotten power. The shadow is your unclaimed story, the chapters you skipped. And when you sit in silence, those pages start to turn. But here's the beauty of it. What you meet in silence does not control you. What you avoid does. By bringing awareness to your shadow, you reclaim the energy it holds. Your anger becomes passion. Your fear becomes wisdom. Your sorrow becomes empathy. Your shame becomes humility. This is not an instant process. It is a practice. Jung himself often spent days alone in quiet reflection, journaling, drawing, dialoguing with figures in his mind. He didn't see it as madness. He saw it as healing. He believed that only by integrating our shadow can we become whole. And wholeness, he taught, is the true goal of the soul. So next time silence makes you uncomfortable, ask yourself, what is rising within me? What part of me wants to be heard? Don't run, don't numb, just listen. Because that discomfort, that's the doorway. Behind it is your truest power. 5. The self-revealed, how silence brings us back to wholeness. What if everything you're searching for, peace, meaning, clarity, was already within you, just waiting for the noise to stop? Carl Jung believed there is something in us far greater than the ego, something whole, balanced, and deeply wise. He called it the self, not the surface self of our personalities or social masks, but the true center of our being. To Jung, the self is the guiding intelligence of the psyche. It is not created, it is uncovered, and silence is how we return to it. The self is not loud, it does not shout for your attention. It waits patiently beneath the layers of identity, thought, and distraction. It whispers through dreams, through symbols, through the subtle pull of intuition. But to hear it, we must first become still. Jung wrote, "In each of us there is another whom we do not know. He speaks to us in dreams and tells us how differently he sees us from the way we see ourselves. That other is not a stranger, it is the self, and in silence we meet. Most of us live as fragments, pieces of who we are, split by trauma, expectations, fear. We adapt to survive, to fit in, to be loved. But in doing so, we lose the thread that connects us to something deeper, something whole. Silence invites us to pick up that thread again, to remember, to reweave. In Jungian psychology, this process is called individuation. It is the path of becoming who you truly are, not who society tells you to be, not who you were raised to be, but the full integrated expression of your unique inner truth. And silence is not just a tool for this journey, it is the space in which it unfolds. Have you ever had a moment where you felt completely aligned? Where your thoughts, your feelings, your body, and your soul all said the same yes? That is the presence of the self, not an idea, not a theory, a felt experience of inner harmony. These moments often come when we're not trying, when we're walking in nature, sitting alone with a cup of tea, watching the sky shift from blue to dusk. Moments when the world is quiet enough for the self to step forward. In silence, the self becomes more than a concept. It becomes a companion, a mirror, a teacher. It reminds us that we are not just minds filled with thoughts. We are souls filled with longing. And that longing is not for perfection, but for integration. Jung saw the self as a mandala, a sacred symbol of wholeness, circular, centered, balanced. He drew hundreds of mandalas during his own silent meditations, each one revealing a deeper layer of his inner journey. The more time we spend in silence, the more we begin to feel the quiet pull toward our own center. The masks drop, the roles fade, and we find ourselves face to face with what has always been there. Jung taught that the self is not something we become in a linear sense. It is something we uncover through deepening cycles of awareness, challenge, surrender, and integration. Silence allows that cycle to unfold naturally. It doesn't force insight. It creates the conditions for it to arise, like sunlight on a seed buried beneath the earth. When we sit in silence, we begin to feel not just our shadow and our archetypes, but something beneath them, the one who contains them all, the silent witness, the eternal presence within us. This is the self, and the more we listen, the more we begin to trust, not just in ourselves, but in the unfolding of life, in the deeper rhythms of the psyche, in the idea that there is an intelligence moving through us, far wiser than our plans or fears. Silence does not promise comfort, but it offers truth. And in that truth, we find something unshakable, not an escape from life, but a return to it, fully, wholly, soulfully. So when you sit in silence, you are not emptying yourself. You are opening yourself to the self that has always been with you, watching, waiting, welcoming you home. 6 Sacred Solitude, Jung's personal practices for listening to the soul. Carl Jung was not just a thinker, he was a practitioner, a soul explorer who lived what he taught. While many wrote theories about the mind from afar, Jung went inward. He built his life around silence, solitude, and communion with the self. He knew that without space, the soul could not speak. And so he created sacred solitude. He once said, "I have had to experience many things before I could reach an understanding of the significance of silence and solitude." Jung didn't just study silence, he structured his life around it. In 1922, he began building a small stone house on the shores of Lake Zurich. He called it Bollingen Tower, a place far from the noise of society with no electricity, no running water, and no distractions. This was no retreat, it was a return, a place where he could let go of his role as doctor, father, thinker, and simply be. Here, Jung would wake with the sun, chop wood, cook simple meals, walk through the forest, and write. But most of all, he would sit. He created long spaces of silence, not to escape the world, but to touch the parts of himself that the world too often drowns out. He would journal, sketch his dreams, paint mandalas, meditate beside the water. Sometimes he would even talk to the inner figures that visited him, his soul in dialogue with itself. This wasn't self-indulgent, it was soul hygiene. Jung believed that solitude wasn't loneliness, it was sacred space. A psychological temple where one could step outside the demands of ego and hear the subtle language of the unconscious. He wrote, "Solitude is not given to us to rest in, but to weigh and measure ourselves." So what did Jung's solitude look like in practice? First, it was intentional. He made time, daily, weekly, seasonally, to be alone with himself. Not scrolling, not consuming, not analyzing, just listening. Second, it was ritualized. He marked his time with symbols, rhythms, and natural cues. Sunrise and sunset shaped his day. Simple tasks, drawing water, lighting a fire, became spiritual acts. His journal was not a tool for productivity, but a mirror for the soul. Third, it was embodied. Jung believed the psyche and the body were deeply intertwined. So solitude for him wasn't just mental, it was physical. He walked, he carved stone. He let the natural world speak to him through sensation and silence. Fourth, it was creative. Jung did not fill his silence with thoughts. He let images rise. He painted what he saw in his dreams. He dialogued with the unconscious using a method he called active imagination, where he would enter a meditative state, allow images or figures to appear, and then respond to them with curiosity and care. He trusted that the psyche knew what it needed to show. His job was not to control the process, but to receive it. You don't need a tower to do this. Jung's practices can be translated into modern life. Even a few minutes of intentional stillness each day can become sacred. Try turning off your phone, sitting by a window, writing without judgment, breathing into the silence, walking alone in nature without trying to figure anything out. Let images rise. Let feelings surface. Don't chase insight. Invite it. Sacred solitude is not about isolation. It is about reconnection to the self, to the unconscious, to the rhythms that speak beneath the rush. Jung saw this as essential not just for healing, but for becoming whole. He believed that without silence and solitude, we become strangers to ourselves. We begin to believe we are only our roles, only our thoughts, only our noise. But in solitude, we remember that we are more. We are myth, we are story, we are soul. So ask yourself, when was the last time you were truly alone with yourself? Not lonely, but inward. And what might happen if you gave yourself the gift of silence? 7 Dream Work and Symbol, how silence decodes the messages of the soul. When we sleep, the outer world fades, and another world opens. A world where logic bends, symbols speak, and time becomes fluid. A world where messages from the soul rise in the form of dreams. Carl Jung believed that our dreams are not random. They are not just the mind processing noise. They are the language of the unconscious. And silence, both inner and outer, is what teaches us how to listen. In dreams, the self whispers. The shadow appears in disguise. Archetypes move through stories. And symbols, strange, beautiful, sometimes disturbing, carry the soul's deepest truths. Jung once wrote, "The dream is a little hidden door in the innermost and most secret recesses of the soul." He believed dreams are not to be interpreted like puzzles, but approached as living conversations. And what makes that conversation possible? Stillness, attention, and reverence for silence. The dream doesn't shout, it invites, it reveals. Jung saw dreams as spontaneous, self-portraying expressions of the psyche, natural, meaningful, and intelligent. They come from a source deeper than ego. They bypass our defenses, and they often show us the very thing we refuse to see in waking life. A lion chasing you, a childhood home in ruin, a stranger offering you a gift. These are not coincidences, they are symbols. And in silence we begin to decode them, not with the mind, but with the soul. To Jung, every dream was unique to the dreamer. He rejected universal dictionaries. Instead, he asked, what does this image mean to you? How did it make you feel? Where in your life is that same feeling present now? This process is not analytical, it's relational. It requires quiet attention and patient reflection. He often told his patients not to rush for answers. Sit with the dream, write it down, draw it, let the image work on you. Because the dream is not an object, it is an event between you and the self. Jung would even meditate on a single dream image for days. He believed symbols had multiple layers, and in silence they revealed themselves over time. One of the greatest challenges of modern life is that we've forgotten how to relate to symbol. We want facts, proof, final answers, but the soul does not speak that way. The soul speaks in metaphor, in mystery, in art, music, movement, and most of all, dreams. Silence is what allows us to receive these messages without rushing to dissect them. To sit with the image of the glowing stone in the forest and ask, what part of me is looking for light in the dark? That is the essence of dream work. Jung taught that over time, if we build a relationship with our dreams, a story begins to unfold, a journey of the self. In this journey, dreams serve as inner guides. They correct us when we're off path. They affirm us when we're aligned. They warn us when we're blind. They gift us wisdom beyond what the conscious mind can see. And the more we listen, the clearer the messages become. But listening requires silence. It requires a quiet life. Not a life without sound, but a life with space. Space to reflect, to feel, to wonder. Jung's own dreams were vast and symbolic. He recorded hundreds of them. Some revealed archetypes. Others unveiled his shadow. And some, like his vision of a great flood consuming Europe, felt prophetic. Yet he didn't claim certainty. He approached each dream with humility, letting it unfold its meaning in its own time. He encouraged us to treat our inner world like a living myth. And in myth, every image is alive. Every encounter has purpose. So what can you do to begin this sacred work? Start here. Create a dream journal. Keep it beside your bed. When you wake, write everything, even fragments. Don't rush to interpret. Just observe. Then in silence, revisit the image later. Let it breathe. Let it speak. Ask, what does this image want from me? What part of me does this reflect? How can I honor it today? Your dreams are not nonsense. They are soul language. And the more silence you give them, the more clearly they will speak. In the dream world, the unconscious becomes visible. In silence, it becomes audible. And through both, we remember that our lives are not random. They are myth unfolding. 8. Silence as the soul's sanctuary. Closing reflections in Jung's enduring wisdom. There is a place inside you that has never been touched by noise, a place before words, beyond identity, still, ancient, unchanging. Carl Jung knew this place well. He spent his life circling it, speaking with it, surrendering to it. He called it the self, but he also called it the soul. And silence was its sanctuary. Across all his writings, dreams, experiments, and teachings, one truth echoes clearly. The most profound revelations do not come through thinking, but through listening. And listening begins in silence. In our world today, noisy, fast, fractured, it can feel impossible to find quiet. But Jung reminds us, you don't have to escape the world to find your soul. You just have to turn inward. Silence is not about the absence of sound. It is about the presence of depth. It is about creating a space within you that allows your inner world to breathe. When we sit in that space long enough, something shifts. We no longer fear the dark. We no longer seek endless distraction. We realize that the things we've spent our lives chasing, meaning, healing, wholeness, were never outside us. They were within, waiting. Carl Jung once wrote, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." But how can we know what to become if we don't first listen to who we already are? The journey into silence is not a luxury. It is not reserved for mystics or monks. It is essential. It is how we reconnect with our inner compass and how we remember our own myth. Because you are not just a person with a history. You are a soul with a story. And that story unfolds not in the spotlight of certainty, but in the twilight of stillness. In silence, your dreams return, your symbols awaken, your shadow speaks, and yourself, your center, your essence steps forward to meet you. So what can we carry with us from Jung's journey? First, trust your inner world. It has its own wisdom, rhythm, and voice. It doesn't need to be fixed. It needs to be heard. Second, make silence a practice, not a punishment. Turn off the outer noise for a few minutes each day. Breathe, listen, feel. Third, let your unconscious speak through dreams, images, instincts, symbols. You don't need to understand everything. Just be in relationship with it. Fourth, honor your shadow. What you fear most may be the missing piece of your wholeness. And fifth, know that you are already whole, even in your pain, even in your confusion, even in your silence. Jung's legacy is not just psychological, it's spiritual. He left us a map, not to avoid the unknown, but to navigate it with reverence. And his map leads inward, not to isolation, but to integration. To sit in silence is to say, I am willing to meet myself, all of me. Not just the parts others approve of, not just the parts I understand, but the full spectrum of soul. In a world that demands we stay busy, silence is rebellion. And in a world that says healing must be loud and external, silence is the place where true alchemy begins. You don't need answers right now. You don't need clarity. You just need presence. Because the truth is, the self is not waiting at the end of the journey. The self is walking with you, whispering through the silence every step of the way. Thank you for walking with us through the quiet. This has been Galactic Wisdom. And remember, in the silence, you are never alone. Have you ever wondered what might happen if you stopped running from silence? If, just for a moment, you turned away from the noise of the world and toward the vast inner sky within you? Carl Jung once said, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." In a time when the world feels louder and more fractured than ever, Jung's wisdom is more than psychology. It is a map home to yourself, to your shadow, to your dreams, and to the sacred voice that has always spoken in silence. This journey is not one of intellect, but of soul. Welcome to Galactic Wisdom, and welcome to Carl Jung. Silence reveals everything. In the end, Jung didn't give us answers. He gave us something more powerful, a path inward. A reminder that healing doesn't always come in sound, but in stillness. That truth isn't always loud, but whispered. You don't have to go far to find yourself. You only have to go deep. And you don't have to be fearless. You only have to be willing to sit and listen. If this journey into silence, symbols, and soul has resonated with you, we invite you to continue exploring with us. Subscribe to Galactic Wisdom for more deep dives into Carl Jung, mysticism, consciousness, shadow work, and the unseen architecture of the human psyche. Like this video if it helped bring you closer to yourself. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you encountered silence in a way that changed you? What have your dreams or shadows shown you lately? And most of all, make space, sit in the quiet, because somewhere in that stillness, the soul is speaking. Thank you for watching. Until next time, keep walking the inward path. This is Galactic Wisdom.